Because of the climate.
For the main part, the attraction...
Stealth TV transmitters are put off the air.
Rural areas.
On Saturday, the 4th of October, in the School Hall, Kingsway, Rochdale. Dancing from 8 to 12 to the Manchester Cayley Band. Admission...
2 more to go up, you know.
Two-channel land is a word that we came across in research materials, whereby the people who didn't live on the border area in the south or on the east coast, who couldn't receive the extra 4 British channels, called themselves, or said of themselves that they were living in two-channel land, and people who weren't living in two-channel land called it two-channel land.
Multi-channel operation, and that was proven in court.
This idea that there is kind of 2 national imaginaries kind of overlapping in certain parts of these islands. So in a sense, there's kind of like 2 imaginaries kind of channeling in.
We had contact.
A lot of it is about these signals, I suppose, spilling over, not really adhering to kind of hard borders or strict borders, and even not really really been influenced by geography. So they create these kind of really unusual forms in kind of in the airwaves, I suppose, and they create these really they're quite unstable. Like even in the exhibition, the signals are quite unstable, but they also, I suppose, relate to quite unstable notions of community and like boundary of what defines a group. You'll notice, you know, in anywhere kind of around the border or anywhere that's in range of 2 sets of signals or 2 transmitters, will have 2 aerials on it. So it's kind of, I suppose, for us, quite symbolic in this exhibition, and quite symbolic of trying to be part of more than one
community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you would get quite a decent signal, because we were located just only about a mile from the sea.
Gallery 1, there's an old transmitter made by a man called Sean McQuillan, who I think, or certainly he thinks, or thought, unfortunately passed away a few years ago, it was the first land-based pirate radio station in Ireland. So there was Radio Caroline out in the sea off the coast of Dundalk. But I think McQuillan Radio, as it was called, or Radio 99, was the first one on like onshore. And so we have his kind of original transmitter, although he kind of remade it or remodified it. It's in a biscuit tin. Another Monaghan man, Michael Thornton, who made this kind of, it's just really a step for around the workshop, but he kind of reinforced it. And it's really a case of like an object that's really practical and used to like make do, you know?
In Gallery 2 is a custom-made cowboy hat by costume designer Amy Egan. So this is sort of inspired by kind of rhinestone cowboy outfits, or nudie suits as they're sometimes called. I suppose another inspiration for it is the amount of these kind of border pirate radio stations that were played almost exclusively country music. Yeah.
The other object is it's a CRT television, so it's an old analog television. I suppose that refers particularly to analog, and we're dealing with analog signals. All of these stations and all of the TV deflector stations, they operated in the analog world, and it was, I suppose, possible to operate in that world since digital things have been a bit more kind of locked down or encoded.
Yeah, maybe one interesting thing is that the images on the TV were transmitted with television transmitters. So I don't know if that gives away too much for you, but I think it's interesting anyway, because it was a big thing. But yeah,
no, totally, yeah.
So we have used television transmitters in the making of the show as well as radio.
Probably coverage area as far as Mid-Ulster, Portadown, Craigavon.
The other thing that's in the gallery space, which is not really visible, is there's a radio sculpture. So this is in the same way that we had these signals spilling over across these islands. There are signals spilling around the gallery, and they're invisible, I suppose, and they could be kind of seen with a radio.
on your show.
You can go around through the space here and to kind of pick up these different stations. But one of the things that I think, from having experimented with it, that becomes really clear is how much the body interacts with these radio waves, and how kind of
fluid the boundaries between the stations are. Yeah, There's very little clear demarcations between, in terms of like, and I suppose that's something we were interested in, is the sort of creating some kind of borders within the kind of space and the transmission of the material, that there is these kind of borders, but the borders within the space are constantly shifting and changing.
In Gallery 3, there's a whole range of archival material, and what we've really been doing for the most part is just gathering like material that other people have spent a lot of time collating and in gathering the material, but also in keeping it available. And so the projects that we're interested in, many of them are kind of community-run projects, and that's true of the projects themselves, but also true of the sources and the resources about those projects.
These images were treated with a variety of analog methods, and then hung alongside some bus timetables, which kind of correspond with Bojana's piece in Gallery 1.
Pirate stations depended solely on the, well, maybe not solely, but mainly on the businesses out of the north of Ireland.
The piece I've created for this exhibition is called the Uncommon Travel Area, parenthesis travel area, and it's a reference to the common travel area, the set of rights that British and Irish citizens who live in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland have. And the piece actually references the fact that those sets of rights do not extend to immigrants who live in either of the two countries. So the uncommon refers to both the fact that these rights, the CTA rights, are not shared amongst all residents of Northern Ireland, but also this feeling that migrancy in Northern Ireland is not something that's particularly visible or common. My practice is at the intersection of performance and participation and migrant activism and advocacy. So most of the time I make performances about migrancy, migrant labor, discrimination against migrants, structural exclusions of migrants. And I'm also interested in the relationship between cultural institutions and migrants, both migrant artists and migrant audiences, and how both those groups, which of course intersect, are sometimes excluded from the cultural sector. When I was thinking about the uncommon and the piece for this exhibition, I was exploring different ways in which these restrictions of CTA appear and pop up in migrant lives. One of the things that I was focusing on is researching different public services that are shared across the island of Ireland between two countries. And one of the things that really came to my attention is how many public bus services traverse the border, not just because they're going from the north to the south, but also because the road that they're taking happens to go across the border, and so might cross between countries and back again and out again. And the fact that for most migrants who live here, that border is perhaps invisible, most of the time invisible, but certainly real, certainly hard, and certainly not possible to cross without a visa. It's important, I think, to remember that it's not just the UK with its new, very stringent, very restrictive, very oppressive, and even more hostile immigration bill. It's also Ireland that decides that immigrants are not part of the CTA, and it is in fact the Gardaí who are most likely to drop onto a bus coming from Ireland to Northern Ireland to check who has visas and who doesn't. The Uncommon has a standing invitation to all the migrants to come and mark their border crossing on the wall. It's also an invitation for migrants to be publicly present in a publicly funded gallery, which I think is quite important for us, for our experiences to be centered within public spaces, including public art spaces. Through those two performances, the wall will become evidence of just how common the border crossings are in the everyday life of the island of Ireland, and just how stark that restriction is for migrants who can't participate in this very everyday, very common activity. And then hopefully, if other migrants feel invited to add to the wall, it will get further populated by the crossings, restricted or undertaken by those of us who are migrants and live on this island. The uncommon mostly references the timetables from and by both Bus Éireann and Ulsterbus, although I will say that perhaps another important reference that the piece hopefully overtly makes is a reference to the Border Irish Twitter account present here through the artificial grass, amongst which the border stamps are kept in both the installation and then the performance. My practice exists between performance and activism, and this border between the two, no pun intended, I think is something I think about a lot and find hard to establish. I would hope that the Uncommon has some activist reverberations. I would hope that it can contribute, this particular piece, that it can contribute to those conversations that are happening in more overtly advocacy and activism circles, if nothing else. Let's talk about it again in a couple of months when I've seen what it has done or not.